By the end of this video, you are going to be a GoPro Hero 11 Black video settings ninja if you're a beginner. And even if you're just kind of know your way around GoPros just a little bit, you're going to pick up some hints and tips that are going to up your game hugely. So let's get into it. Cheesy. First step is let's turn on our GoPro. Obviously this is pretty straightforward, but there's a button here at the side on the left hand side, and this doubles as the mode button. Now, very simple. If you want to go from video to photo or whatever, we just press this button. We can go photo, press it again, we go to time lapse, and then for this video we're talking about the video settings. So that's what we're going to look at here. Now, if we look around here on the top left, this is what's left in our SD card, so that's going to change depending on the recording mode. So this case we're at 4K 60, so if we're up a little bit higher like the 5K, that's going to get less, and so on, right? So that's your SD card, that's the mode you're in, and that is the actual battery that is left in the GoPro. And down the side then here on the left and the right, we have these other little icons. These all change depending on what you're doing. So for example, this is the boost, this is the 2x slow motion, the lens. All of these are fully customizable. Now, you mightn't want to change them, but the time will come when you get a little bit more familiar with the GoPro that you go, okay, I will never use that, but what would be really useful if this was there, so you can customize that. And we will get into that a little later on. The meat and the two veg, which is a very Irish saying, but the main things here is down the bottom. So our activity. These are our presets. Now, what a preset is, basically, it's a whole bunch of settings that GoPro have created themselves. There's one called standard, full frame, activity, cinematic, ultra slow-mo. So for example, if you wanted to get into one of those settings really quickly, you would just press this one, and then it is ready to go. If you wanted to go to another one, we press the preset down here, and then we select whichever one we want next. So maybe this one. And it's as easy as that to start maneuvering your way through. Now let's take a look at these actual presets, because this is where you might get a little bit confused, but this is why I'm here. This is why we're all together, so nobody gets confused. On the numbers here, 5.3K. So where the K is, that's essentially the resolution. That's 5.3K. That's a pretty huge image, which is going to be the best quality that you're going to get out of the GoPro Hero 11 Black. Then if we go down here, it's jumped off here, but we can see the 30. Everybody loves my THs here. The 30 is the actual frames per second. So that's how many frames per second the GoPro records. In this case, it would be 30. Down there would be 30. See? 60 and so on. Then we have the lens. So there's different lenses in the actual GoPro. So if we want to change these here in the standard profile, we can see we can go down the bottom to the linear and the horizon lock. And what the horizon lock does is basically no matter what way you twist the camera, the horizon always stays perfectly still. It doesn't move. Really cool effect. And if you're doing a lot of motion and running around the place, it's always good maybe to keep that stable. Then we have other lenses here, like the linear lens, which is the equivalent to a 19 to 30mm lens, wide, super view, which is really wide, and then new to the GoPro Hero 11 Black is a hyper view mode. Now, all of these might mean nothing to you, but essentially they're going to give you wider or narrower fields of view, which is what you're seeing, and more importantly is what your audience is seeing. So select whichever one you want. Let's take a proper look at these presets, because you're like, okay, I don't want to shoot everything in 5.3K. Maybe you want something else. What about that famous 4K 120 frames per second, which is amazing quality, really, really slow down footage. So if we scroll down here, we go, okay, there is no 120 frames per second and 4K. So what you can do with any of these presets is actually select this little pencil here, and you can change the settings on the preset. Now, you can also create your own. Firstly, we're going to edit one of these settings, and then we're going to create our own, and then the sky's the limit. So I'm going to press the edit button, and then we have our res and our FPS. So let's tap this. We want 4K. So all we got to do is press 4K, and then the frame rate 120p. That's it. And then we have our 16:9, 4:3, or 8:7. These are ratios. So essentially 16:9 ratio looks like this, 4:3 is quite square, and 8:7 uses the brand new sensor that's in the GoPro Hero 11 Black, which is pretty huge. And what that allows you to do, which we're probably not going to get into too much detail today, but that allows you to reframe the image whatever way you want without losing any quality. It's a huge image. You can zoom in and do all kinds of cool things. Now we have our resolution set up, so our infamous 4K 120. Let's press this and then we go back. So the next option here, lens, like we've seen, we can change around any of the lens. So let's say we want to go down to a wide lens. Let's tap that. Let's tap the screen to go back. And hyper smooth. Hyper smooth essentially is GoPro's incredible stabilization. So if you don't want your footage to be all jittery and shaky when you're running around doing whatever you do, then you got to make sure hyper smooth is on. So hyper smooth, it's on, it's off, it's boost, which means there's more of it, and then there is auto boost. Now, depending on the resolution that you're in, you may not get all of these settings for the boost mode, but what auto boost does is the more you need to boost, then the GoPro will actually go, okay, this guy's running a lot faster, I need to apply more hyper boost. And that's essentially what it does. So whichever one you need to use, I think is a good starting point. Have it on, but I like to leave it on boost. That's our hyper smooth done. Let's tap back to get back. And then we can scroll down to some more settings. Now these are schedule capture. So essentially you can tap this and you can turn it on, and basically you set the GoPro to record for however long. So you could say, okay, I want it to come on at 9:36 p.m. We could go back. How long do we want the duration for? Let's say we want it to go on and record for 2 hours. This is really useful if you're doing time lapses in the middle of the night or you can't be bothered getting up. Just position your GoPro for a sunrise or a sunset and you're good to go. Hindsight is something that we could all use. Now there is a downside to using hindsight I'm going to get into a sec, but essentially if we turn this on, the GoPro is always going to be recording the last 15 seconds before you press the actual shutter button, the red button up here. Or we can have it 30 seconds. So let's say there's something cool happens. You're like, oh, great. Oh, you missed it. But if you have hindsight on, it's always going to be recording that. Now, there's two kind of downsides to this. You got to remember, A, to be aiming the camera all the time. But the other side is this is going to use your battery just a little bit more. But just keep that in mind. Then we have a timer. We can have our timer on if we want. So set the delay so you can get into the shot. So we'll say this second here, it's 3 seconds. Set your GoPro to capture 3 seconds after the shutter button is pressed. It's kind of good for selfies. You can bring it up to 10 seconds if you want. So again, all of this is for what you might or might not need. Now, ProTune. This is, well, it's kind of big boy stuff, but it's not that big boy stuff, okay? So we have a couple of options here. We have 10-bit color, which essentially is billions of colors as opposed to millions of colors, which essentially what that means is everything color-wise, if you're color grading, then you've got a bit more scope to push the colors around and the skies won't look as banded and pixelated. So if you have an option to use 10-bit color, if you are grading, and that'll be in another video, then that's one for you. But for now, we're just going to leave it in A because it's not available in every single mode. The bitrate. So I would always suggest having the bitrate set to high, simply because basically the bit rate is how much data the GoPro is going to use. So if there's lots of movement, you want the image to look as best as possible. So always have a high bit rate. Now the shutter, that's essentially the shutter in the camera. That's going to make things look good or look bad possibly. So we have an option here to leave it on auto. So how long the shutter should stay open for. Essentially the shutter is in every camera. That's about how much light it sucks in. For example, a shutter speed of 1/50 is that magical cinematic motion blur speed thing, but not necessarily to worry about that. So we can change this to 1/240, 1/1920, and so on and so forth. If you're using ND filters, this is probably the time where you'd actually start using a manual shutter. But for the best part, I think GoPro do a good enough job that you can leave it on auto for most cases, especially if you're starting out. It's going to be super cool. Then we can look down to exposure value compensation, very complicated thing, but essentially you can change the exposure up or down slightly. If you want to change the EV comp, you can bring it down -2, +2. So that's going to make the image brighter or slightly darker. Depending on the scenario that you're in, you might go, okay, I need a little bit more light here. So you might bring it up to +2, or you also might just leave it at 0. In most cases, 0 is good. Now the white balance is the next setting that we're going to talk about here. And again, this is something that we would always suggest. Who's we? Is there anybody else here? only me. White balance is something that essentially dictates how warm or cool the actual image looks. The important thing here is the image has to look correct to your audience, so always try and set the white balance in the camera. You can do it in post-production, but that can cause all kinds of problems. So auto white balance is good if you're in the one scene, but if you're changing scenes, then you might get a bit of a green hue, or it just might screw the colors up slightly. Chances are it probably won't, but if you want to set the white balance, you tap it, and then we can make things cooler down this way, or we can make them warmer. General rule of thumb is around 5500 kelvins is a daylight setting, and then you can bring it up or down as needs be. So adjust it to what you want, or again, in a lot of cases, you will be absolutely fine with auto, which is bang in the center. Next step is ISO. Now, I hope you guys are following along and we're doing a good enough job. There's that wee thing again. And I'm doing a good enough job of bringing you along here. So ISO as well, without getting anyway technical and boring the socks off you, ISO will kind of brighten and darken the image as well. It's very different from the exposure value that we spoke about earlier on, but ISO will help the sensor suck in a little bit more light. It kind of raises it artificially. So in a nutshell, the higher the maximum ISO, the noisier the image, and you do not want noise in your image. Noise will be particularly predominant in the shadows, which is the darker parts of your video, and well, it's a huge distraction and it just looks like you have no idea what's going on. So in the GoPro, you can have the ISO, the minimum, so that's the minimum ISO that's always going to use, and then you can have the max. For me, anything I think over 400 can push the GoPro way too much, so I tend to leave it 400. If you really want to push it, then maybe leave it at 800, and that's it. Now, the next setting is probably one of the most important settings that I can tell you about. GoPros have a phenomenal image, but they look very kind of over sharpened. They look a bit too digital. So the sharpness is something that you really want to change. So tap sharpness, and then we have sharpness, which is high. We don't want high sharpness. We don't even want medium. We want low sharpness, which is a great setting to have, and it just makes things look a little bit more filmic and a little bit more cinematic, basically. And that's kind of what you want, to bring your audience in where nothing is a distraction. So I leave it on low. Color, GoPro color can be a little bit too saturated, a little bit too colorful. You can have it vibrant if you want. No. So you can either leave it on natural, or you can bring it down to flat. Now keep in mind, flat color profile is going to be very kind of a little bit washed out. And this is where you're going to have to grade it. And if color grading isn't your thing yet, and in a couple of weeks I tell you it will be, because you'll be a master, then leave it on natural. Simple. It's one or the other. Natural, or if you're putting it on flat, it's going to need some work. Not a lot, but again, it's just pushing sliders around. So we have raw audio if we want. So raw audio records a standard audio without a raw audio track. We can bring a low one, minimal processing, or you can create a raw audio track with full processing. I tend to leave this one off. And then the wind, if you're using the actual mic in the GoPro, which to be fair is pretty decent, then it will automatically reduce the wind noise. And wind noise can be a huge distraction again to your audience. So you can have it automatic, you can have it on, or you can just have it off. Very simple. Now what I would say with something like this, if you're not in a windy scenario, leave it off. But if you are, leave it on. And you have to experiment to see how good and how bad this is. Again, every situation is different. And then that's the main video settings covered for, we'll say, editing a preset. And then we have our shortcuts. So remember those icons that we had up here, 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 and here? Well, look, lower left, we can change that to slow-mo, hyper smooth, schedule capture, duration. We can change these to more or less whatever we want. Once we're good to go and we've edited that preset, then it's just a case of that's it. Now, if for whatever reason, you know, in a week's time, you're like, oh, I'm after messing something up, and you want to change that preset back to what it came from directly from GoPro, all we got to do is select the little pencil icon again, press edit, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then press restore. And hit restore preset. Boom. And it's gone back to the original factory settings. So now you're getting a little bit brave, thinking, okay, I can edit a preset and I don't want to work with all of these. So maybe you want your own preset. So you get the exact same options. All you got to do is on the top right here, this little icon, hit that, and we can hit the plus, and then we select a new preset. So it's either going to be video or looping. So let's select the tick here, and then we're back into essentially what we've just gone through. So we've our mode, our resolution, the lens. Let's create a 4K 121 here really quickly, an 8:7 aspect ratio. And as we can see as an example, not every resolution and frame rate is available in every aspect ratio. So for this case, I'm just going to leave it at 4K 60, and we're going to have hyper smooth on. We're going to have 10-bit color on. We're going to have the bit rate set to high, and so on and so forth. And then once you're good to go after creating that preset, select the little tick up the top right. You can choose a name. So you could choose custom if you want, or whatever you want. And then you can see that we've got custom down at the bottom here. And that is how you start working with all of those settings. Now, if you've connected the GoPro to your phone, you can easily modify all of these settings as well. It's probably a little bit quicker to work on it through your phone, but the process is the exact same. There's nothing different. They just look in different slightly layout. So depending on what you like using. But here's the thing, if you're out in the field, if you're out and about, you may not want to whip out your phone and be working off of that all the time when it comes to shooting with a GoPro, because it's really designed, you know what I mean, a canoe going, okay, I want to change a preset here, I want to edit one, I'm going to get out my phone. No, it's just like, no, splash. No, not a good idea. There are other video settings that you don't want to miss. That's one part of it on particular shots, but swipe down and we will get more video settings. So what we're going to do is we swipe down, we can swipe across, and then we have the video mode, highest quality, or extended battery. So you might be out going, oh, all my batteries are gone. You can bring down this to extended battery. But for the best part, I tend to leave it on highest quality all the time because that's what we want. Yes, gear doesn't matter, but people do, and people are used to looking at decent quality stuff. So I would suggest always leave it on highest quality. Now, also here are controls. If for whatever reason all of this has melted your mind, you can just go down to easy controls, but then we know you're a pro. You can go up to pro and leave it on pro. And then the preferences, we have a couple of other options here as well. And here's a quick tip actually, if you want to save your battery, turn off stuff like voice control, unless you really use it. See, I've got mine turned off by default because it eats the battery because the GoPro's always listening. Turn it off. And one other useful tip here in the general settings is the default preset. So every time you turn on the camera, what should it go to? What should your GoPro go to? So you can go last used video preset, last used photo. So for example, if you're always shooting slow motion, you could have that going to the last used video, which could be a preset that you've set up. And every time you go turn on the GoPro, it's ready to take slow-mo. Simple. If you're brand new to GoPros, these can be a very intimidating camera because they're insanely powerful. They bring amazing image quality and they're tiny so they can fit anywhere. But please take your time with the camera. Now, what I've said here is not the Bible. It's not like, you know, the word. Do what works for you. These are the basics. These are to get you going. And one of the things here is on all of those presets and the shortcuts on the lens and stuff on the left and the right around the screen, you're going to figure out over time what works best for you. And that is the most important thing. It's not works best for me. So if I have something down the top left, anyway, that's for me, not for you, but you got to go figure those out. And the only way you do that is by using the camera every single day. And keep that in mind. Practice does essentially make you, you know, a little bit more perfect than you already are. Oh. So yeah, that's it. GoPro's really easy to use. Best of luck on your GoPro journey. Let me know what you would like to see next. Is it the photo settings? Is it the time warp settings? Or maybe is it how to make your GoPro footage look cinematic? Drop me a comment below. I'll see you on the next one.